My mother-in-law humiliated me in front of the staff. She had no idea I owned the entire mansion. I stood in my own kitchen, in my own house, while my mother-in-law told the housekeeper I wasn't allowed to touch the good china. My name was on the deed. She didn't know that yet. If you like stories where quiet women win in the end, hit subscribe, because this one is going to feel really good. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and 5 years ago, I was just a graphic designer with a small apartment and a habit of saying yes to things I shouldn't have. My older brother, Daniel, was the one person who always saw through people before I did. He's an accountant, calm, careful, the kind of guy who reads contracts twice. When I first brought Marcus home to meet him, Daniel shook his hand, smiled politely, and later told me, "He talks about your money like it's already his." I laughed it off. Marcus was charming. He opened doors, remembered my coffee order, told me I was the smartest woman he'd ever met. His mother, Diane, was elegant and sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who wore pearls to breakfast. The first time we met, she looked at my thrift store blazer and said, "Well, at least you have a pretty face." I told myself she was just old-fashioned. 2 years earlier, before I met Marcus, my grandmother had passed away and left me something nobody in my new family knew about. An 11-bedroom estate on the coast, worth just under $9 million, along with a trust that paid out quietly every quarter. I never talked about it. My grandmother used to say, "People change around money, so let them love you before they know you have it." I took that advice seriously. I lived modestly. I let people believe I was ordinary. Marcus and I got married 18 months after we met. The wedding was small. Diane complained the flowers weren't elegant enough, and that my side of the family looked tired. My mother cried in the bathroom. I told myself every family has friction. The honeymoon phase lasted almost a year. Marcus was attentive, affectionate, always texting to check on me during the day. It felt like love. Then the comments started. "Why do you need to see Daniel every week? He's not that important." "That dress makes you look whiter than you are." "I'm just saying your friends don't seem to like me very much." Small things, deniable things. Each one on its own sounded like nothing. Together, they became a fence around me. Within a year, I'd stopped seeing my college friends. Daniel called less because Marcus made every visit feel like an interrogation afterward. "What did he say about me? What did you tell him?" The first real incident happened at a dinner party. Marcus had been drinking. I said something he didn't like. I honestly don't even remember what. And he grabbed my wrist under the table so hard it left 4 fingerprint bruises. I wore long sleeves for a week. He cried the next morning, said he didn't know what came over him, said his father used to do worse to his mother, and he swore he'd never be like that. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The apologies got shorter every time. The first one lasted 3 days. Flowers, dinners, gentle words. By the 5th incident, it lasted 3 hours. By the 10th, it was just, "You know I love you," muttered while he checked his phone. Diane knew. I could see it in the way she looked at my arms sometimes. She never said anything to protect me. Once, she actually said, "Marcus has always had a temper. You just have to know how to handle him." As if I was the one doing something wrong. 2 years into the marriage, Marcus suggested we move into his family's old lake house. A temporary arrangement while we saved for our own place, he said. I agreed, mostly because I was exhausted, and it felt easier to say yes than to fight. What I didn't know was that Diane had quietly convinced the family lawyer to put my name nowhere on that property, just to keep things simple. I found out about that particular detail much later. Living under Diane's roof was its own kind of prison. She hired staff, a housekeeper named Rosa and a groundskeeper, and made a point of instructing them in front of me about the rules of the house, as if I were a guest who didn't know how to behave. One afternoon, I reached for a teacup from her cabinet and she snapped at Rosa right in front of me. Make sure she doesn't touch the good china. She doesn't understand its value. I stood there, 30 years old, being spoken about like a child who'd wandered into the wrong room. Rosa looked at me with something like pity. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and walked away, because I already had a plan forming, and it had nothing to do with china cups. The ticking clock arrived 6 months later, when my grandmother's estate lawyer called to tell me the trust required a formal property transfer. I needed to officially take possession of the mansion within 90 days, or the terms would trigger a costly legal review. 90 days. That was my deadline, whether I was ready or not. Around the same time, I started noticing things about Marcus that didn't add up. Late-night phone calls he'd take outside. A second phone I found tucked behind the winter coats in the hall closet, password protected, buzzing constantly with messages from someone saved only as K. When I asked him about it, he told me it was a work phone. I let it go on the surface, but underneath, something in me had gone still and cold and clear. I called Daniel. For the first time in almost 2 years, I told him everything. The bruises, the isolation, Diane's cruelty, the second phone. He didn't yell at me for staying quiet. He just said, "Okay, let's fix this." My brother, the accountant who reads everything twice, started quietly gathering what he could. Screenshots I sent him, photos of injuries I'd never reported, bank statements showing Marcus had been transferring money out of our joint account into an account I didn't recognize. The final incident happened 3 weeks before my deadline. Marcus came home late, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, and when I asked where he'd been, he shoved me into the hallway wall, hard enough to crack the drywall behind my shoulder. Diane heard the noise. She came out of her room, looked at me crumpled on the floor, and told Marcus to keep it down because the housekeeper will hear. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Just, "Keep it down." That was the moment I stopped hoping this family would ever see me as anything other than furniture. The next morning, I called the lawyer and told him I was ready to move forward with the transfer immediately. Within a week, the mansion, my grandmother's mansion, $9 million sitting on 11 acres of coastline, was officially, legally, entirely mine. Daniel helped me quietly move my most important belongings, documents, and evidence out of the lake house while Marcus was at work and Diane was at her weekly luncheon. Then I did something I'd been planning for weeks. I invited them both to see the new house, letting Marcus believe I'd finally inherited a little something from my grandmother, and letting Diane believe she was about to get a tour of some modest cottage she could criticize. They arrived in Diane's town car, dressed like they were attending a garden party, ready to look down on whatever I had to show them. Rosa, yes, the same Rosa from Diane's house, who I had personally hired away with triple her old salary, opened the front door in a crisp uniform and greeted them by name. I watched Diane's face change as she stepped into the marble foyer under the chandelier my grandmother had imported from Vienna, past the wall of family photos that included documents from the estate lawyer, framed and hung deliberately where anyone waiting in the sitting room would see them. "This is yours?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. "It's been mine for 2 years," I said. "I just never saw a reason to tell people who didn't respect me." Diane opened her mouth to say something about the china, about the rules, about who belonged where, and I handed her an envelope instead. Inside were copies of everything Daniel and I had compiled. The bank transfers Marcus had been quietly siphoning to an account tied to a woman named Kristen, photographs of my injuries with dates, and a letter from my attorney outlining the divorce filing already in motion, along with a restraining order request based on the documented assault 3 weeks earlier. Marcus tried to grab the papers. Rosa, standing calmly by the door, simply said, "Sir, I think it's time you left the property." His own former housekeeper, asking him to leave a house he thought he'd one day inherit through his mother's connections. The divorce took 4 months. Because of the documented abuse and financial misconduct, Marcus walked away with nothing from the marriage and a criminal assault charge that Daniel made sure the district attorney didn't quietly drop. Diane's carefully maintained reputation among her country club friends crumbled once the story got out. Turns out, gossip travels fast when the woman everyone underestimated finally has the receipts. She lost her seat on 2 charity boards within the year. I sold the lake house's old furniture Diane had once forbidden me from touching. I kept the mansion. I kept Rosa, who became more of a friend than an employee. And I kept Daniel close, the one person who never stopped believing something was wrong, even when I couldn't see it myself. 6 months after the divorce, I hosted a small dinner in that same marble foyer where Diane once tried to shrink me down to nothing. This time, the guest list was full of people who actually knew my worth, and every single one of them was welcome to touch the good china. If this story hit home for you, hit subscribe, because next week, I'm telling you about the wife who let her husband's mistress move into the guest room and didn't tell either of them she owned the deed to the whole street.